Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumburg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on the economic impact of support. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast is a bit shorter than most of our webcasts and lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:15 Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I'm pleased to see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. But for those who are not familiar with MetricNet or who are joining us for the first time, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of different industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the desktop support, service desk, and call center benchmarks and client relationships for MetricNet. The work we do for IT service and support groups worldwide spans the gambit from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the IT service and support groups that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at metricnet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our Metric of the Month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'm going to go ahead and preempt that question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are what we call peer group benchmarks that compare your service desk or desktop support group to a unique peer group of other comparable organizations. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're comprehensive in scope. The peer groups that are selected from our benchmarking database are based upon your organization's scope and scale and complexity and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of tickets handled, since IT service and support is a scale-sensitive function. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to metricnet.com, click the Shop selection on the upper navigation bar, and you will see our desktop support, call center, and service desk industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We are active on all of the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of IT service and support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. Now, for those who would like to follow along during the webcast, use the hashtag MetricNetLive on Twitter to participate and share thoughts, key points, and questions, or just to follow along. One final note, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of the presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful. And in return for that courtesy, I will send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. You know, one of the benefits of working in the benchmarking business is that we get to see lots and lots of data related to IT service and support. Over the past 25 years, most recently as a VP at Gartner, and prior to that as the CEO of the Verity Group, and most recently as managing partner of MetricNet, I've had the opportunity to work on more than 2,000 service and support benchmarks. And this gives us a great deal of insight into what works in service and support, what doesn't work in service and support, and what the industry's leading service and support organizations are doing. Now, we also get a bird's eye view into the current and emerging trends in the industry. And what's trending right now, at least from our perspective, are the 10 things on this list. We call them the 10 megatrends in end-user support. I'll go through them quickly, and where we want to focus our attention for the remainder of the webcast is on this 10th megatrend. But let me go through the first 9 very quickly. First, there is what we call the rise of the strategic service and support organization. You know, when I got started in this industry, the whole focus was on trying to minimize the cost per contact for end-user support. But increasingly what has happened, particularly in recent years, is a focus more on value creation, less of a focus on pure cost containment, and a focus on how does service and support create value? How can they be strategic? How can they be preventive? How can they be proactive? And what can we do to drive the greatest possible value from service and support? And that's very positive development, and it will really ultimately end up being the focus of today's webcast, the emergence of the value-centric support organization. What we have also seen in recent years is a more holistic approach to key performance indicators. You know, historically, KPIs were viewed simply as a way to track and trend performance within a support organization, but increasingly they are being used diagnostically to identify strengths and weaknesses in the organization and to drive positive change in the organization to help close those negative performance gaps and ultimately improve the performance of service and support. Benchmarking to improve performance is a mega trend that has emerged within the last 3 to 5 years. And now more than 50% of all service and support organizations do benchmark, and many of them benchmark at least once per year. User self-help, self-service, of course, a huge trend. For those of you who work in service and support, you know that there is a lot of focus right now, and there has been in recent years, on enabling users to solve their own problems, to get their own solutions, to enter a self-help portal, to do their own password resets, and so on. So user self-help, one of the 10 megatrends that we have identified. Also, there's marketing of service and support. And I'm not talking about marketing in the traditional sense, by outsourcers, for example, that might be wanting to sell their services. What I'm talking about is managing your message internally. Because what we found is that for many service and support organizations, there's a big gap between the perception of what you do and the reality of what you do. And towards the end of today's webcast, we're going to be talking about how to manage that message and how to make sure that that gap between perception and reality is as narrow as it can possibly be. There's now a greater understanding of TCO in service and support. One implication of this is that many organizations are focused and push very hard on resolution on first contact, FCR as we call it, first contact resolution, and first level resolution. First level resolution helps to minimize the total cost of ownership, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. First contact resolution is what drives customer satisfaction. There's also a huge focus on what we call process rationalization. ITIL, ITSM are just 2 manifestations of the focus on trying to rationalize IT service and support processes and taking an end-to-end view of IT service and support. Knowledge management and remote diagnosis, they're not the same topics, but they are closely related. Increasingly in recent years, we're seeing a large emphasis on the development of fully featured knowledge management systems and knowledge bases that enable level 1 support to resolve more contacts on that first contact resolution and at first level. And remote diagnostic tools, you're familiar with some of the big names like FOMGAR. This is a huge focus now in the industry. But where we want to focus our attention is in the emergence of the value-centric support organization. Of all the megatrends that I've shown on this page, this one is the game changer. This is the one that has the potential to transform every support organization from a tactically driven function into a strategic source of value creation. Now I want to introduce a concept to you called the paradox of IT service and support. The paradox is this. Less than 5% of all IT spending is allocated to end user support. The remaining 95+% is spent on the development and maintenance of applications, things like network operations, mainframe and mid-range computing, desktop computing, and then contracted services, things like disaster recovery. Now, when an organization is only spending 4 or 5% of its resources on a particular line item, in this case service and support, meaning the level 1 service desk and level 2 desktop support, a lot of people erroneously assume that there's not much upside opportunity in IT service and support. And the result is that many organizations are managed with the goal, and I mentioned this very early on, of minimizing costs. However, the most effective support strategies focus on maximizing value. Now, I began working in this industry in 1988, first as a consultant and later as a speaker and an author. And one of the things that has always bothered me is that most service and support organizations are treated and viewed as cost centers. Unfortunately, cost centers are tactically driven. They tend to be reactive, and they often lurch from crisis to crisis. They tend to be on the defensive when it comes to spending and investments. Value centers, by contrast, focus on the creation of value for the enterprise. Now, the most obvious indication and the surest sign that a support organization is value-centric is the existence of a value proposition. Now, value proposition is real simple. It contains just 3 things. The first is a statement of the value that service and support will create and generate for the enterprise. The second thing is this, the quantification of that value. That is, you estimate how much economic value in dollar values or whatever your local currency is, how much value you're going to create for the enterprise. And the third thing is a statement of your competitive advantage. Now, please note that a value proposition is not the same thing as a mission statement. Many people confuse those 2 things. The main difference is that a value proposition is quantified. A mission statement is not quantified. Now, here's an example of a value proposition that hangs on the wall of a large insurance company headquartered in the Midwest. Now, I want you to notice several things about this. The first thing is that it's very succinct. It's only 56 words long. I'm going to quickly read this. The XYZ Support Center is committed to quickly and efficiently resolving customer problems and service requests. We pledge to achieve measurable cost savings of at least 2 times our annual budget and remain in the top quartile of all service and support organizations. We will do this while maintaining a 92% or higher customer satisfaction rating. Now, in addition to being succinct, it also has the 3 central elements of a value proposition. Here's the statement of value: quickly and efficiently resolving customer problems. Here's a statement of economic value to be created: achieve measurable cost savings at least 2 times the annual budget. So if this support organization is spending $1 million a year, what they're saying is that they will return $2 million of economic value to the organization. The third thing that makes up a value proposition is the statement of your competitive advantage. Here's their statement: we'll do this while maintaining a 92% or higher customer satisfaction rating. So it is succinct, it fulfills all of the criteria for a value proposition, and thirdly, I want to point out that it's bold. Some would say that this is fairly audacious, and I would agree with you. It is in your face, as it should be, but it's something that gets noticed. And in service and support, one of the things you have to do on a continuous basis, and again, we'll get into this towards the end of today's webcast, is that you got to communicate your message very effectively. And sometimes you do have to be bold and audacious and in your face. Now that brings us to our first polling question of the day. And the polling question has to do, as you can imagine, with a written value proposition. And here's the first polling question: does your support organization have a written value proposition? You have 3 choices here. Yes, you do. No, you do not. Or not applicable. If you're associated with a consulting firm or some organization that does not have a service and support function, then not applicable would be the right answer here. So does your support organization have a written value proposition? And while you're doing that, while you're answering that question, I just want to shout out to a few people who've joined us on the webcast here today. First of all, I really appreciate it for all of you. Gene Robbins, and I'm just picking names here at random. Patricia Nichols, thanks for joining us. Rob Cole, great to see you here. Russell Six, thanks for joining us. Stephen Craig, great to see you here. Wanda Barr, and Willie Martin, just a few names that I wanted to shout out. Appreciate all of you joining us on the webcast here today. What I want to do is close down that survey and share the results with you. 11% of you have a value proposition. Another 82% of you do not have a value proposition. Now, that's a fairly typical result. When we deliver this webcast, usually the ratio is about 8 or 9 to 1 in favor of those who do not have a value proposition. Hopefully, by the end of today's webcast, you will understand why having a value proposition is important, and you will also understand the mechanics of creating the quantified piece of the value proposition so that you will be in a position to create your own value position for your IT service and support organization. Okay, we're going to move on now, and let me get my pointer back here. One of the things we've noticed in IT service and support is that support organizations tend to evolve through a continuum, or tend to evolve through a series of stages. Those support organizations that are the most immature, if you will, or are new, tend to operate very reactively. A firefighting mentality often prevails. Oftentimes they're focused exclusively or almost exclusively on service level compliance, but these tend to be fairly chaotic environments. They're slave to the service levels, and they're continuously playing catch up with user needs and expectations. Well, at some point, most service and support organizations recognize that there must be a better way to do things than to fight fires all day long, and they begin to make investments in tools and training and technology that enables them to enter what we call the growth or the development stage. A knowledge base of problem solutions is typically established. An expert network of problem solvers is developed outside service and support, and user self-help oftentimes begins at the growth stage. And those organizations that are the most successful at evolving service and support enter what we call the strategic stage of IT service and support. Now, the purpose of a strategic stage support organization is to make end users more productive and to drive a positive view of all of IT, not just of service and support, but a positive view of all of IT. Now, in this environment, a preventive and proactive culture prevails. Support will anticipate user needs and expectations, and they provide services accordingly. The goal here is not customer satisfaction. That's a losing proposition. That's a neutral proposition. The goal is customer enthusiasm and the creation of value. That's the goal of a strategic stage support organization. We're going to be talking extensively about this process here, the creation of value in IT service and support. Not surprisingly, if you look at which service and support organizations have a value proposition, it's the ones who have evolved the furthest. Only about 4% of the reactive stage service and support organizations have developed a written value proposition. We consider these to be very tactical, cost-oriented support organizations. Those that have evolved a bit further into the growth stage, 16% of them, as near as we can tell, have a written value proposition. And those that are strategic, the value centers, roughly 2/3 of them have a written value proposition. Now, the obvious chicken or egg question is, are the strategic support organizations that way because of their value proposition, or do they have a value proposition because they are strategic? Well, the answer we found is some of both. Some are strategic because of their value proposition, which helped accelerate their evolution down this continuum, whereas others are strategic or have a value proposition because they are strategic. Today's webcast, as much as anything else, is about making this transformation as quickly and efficiently as possible and using your value proposition as a vehicle or a tool to accelerate your transformation from a tactical reactive stage support organization to a strategic value-centric service and support organization. Now, in order to develop a credible value proposition, you need to understand how value is created in service and support. And there are at least 4 main sources of economic value creation in service and support. There are others besides this list. This is not all-inclusive. But one of them is your ability to reduce ticket volume through things like root cause analysis. That is, you look at your call profile or your inbound ticket profile and you ask yourself, what can we do to prevent some of this stuff? Sometimes it means training end users more effectively, and it doesn't mean that service and support would have to do the training, but sometimes through training you can eliminate inbound call types. Sometimes through better system design, more robust design, you can prevent some of these inbound calls. What we found is that Those that are the most successful at RCA, root cause analysis, are able to eliminate as much as 15 or even 20% of the inbound call profile. And I'm not talking about deflecting or diverting calls into a self-help portal like an automated password reset. I'm talking about what's left over after you've deflected and diverted everything into those self-help portals. The call profile or the ticket profile that is left over, eliminating between 15 and 20% of that, is a reasonable target, and it has been achieved by many organizations that are serious about their root cause analysis efforts. That creates value because you prevent those tickets from hitting the service and support organization in the first place. Secondly, your ability to improve end-user productivity by reducing incident resolution times. This is the biggest single source of value creation in service and support, as you'll see momentarily. I'm going to present some real-world benchmarking data from organizations and how much time they have saved individuals on an annual basis through quicker resolution of problems and incidents. Thirdly, you have the ability to reduce total cost of ownership in service and support by maximizing your level 1 resolution rate. Some of you have probably heard this referred to as shift left, where on the far right of the continuum you have N-level support in IT. That includes everything past desktop support, such as IT people within applications and development, people within the data center, the NOC, and so on. If you can move those problems to level 2 desktop support or move level 2 problems to level 1, imagine going to the left on this continuum, moving level 1 problems to level 0, which is self-help, self-service, and moving level 0 problems to level -1, meaning that they've been eliminated through root cause analysis or some other process. Shift left is the idea of pushing tickets as far to the left as you possibly can, because that is where they are less costly to resolve. And again, I'm going to show you some benchmarking data on this momentarily. Now, the fourth primary source of value is your power and your ability to mitigate the effects of unplanned downtime through planning, prevention, and aggressive remediation. So what we're going to be doing is going through a 3-part case study on how the service desk from the insurance company, whose value proposition we looked at a few minutes ago, how they quantified their value to their organization. And I believe this provides a template for any of you listening to today's webcast for how you too can quantify the economic value that you generate for your organization. Now, they started by undertaking a fairly aggressive root cause analysis program. Remember, this was the first source of value that we looked at on the prior page. Let me set the stage here. This insurance company was spending about $4.8 million, just under $5 million a year on their service desk, just level 1 service desk. Now, they supported a little more than 8,000 end users, 8,190 users. They handled about 21,300 tickets per month. And as I mentioned, they embarked upon an aggressive root cause analysis program. Now, at the beginning of the year, this was a 1-year RCA program. They measured it at the beginning of the year. They measured it at the end of the year. Now, I have to warn you, I'm going to go through a little bit of math and arithmetic in some of this case study, but it's important because we want to talk about the quantification of value for end-user service and support, and of necessity, we do have to look at some of the arithmetic, some of the math. It's not complex stuff, but it can be a little bit tedious. If we look at the number of users supported, they started the year supporting 8,190 users. They ended the year supporting 8,650 users, a net increase of 460 users. They started the year with 21,300 tickets per month. They ended the year with 19,100 tickets per month, so a reduction of 2,200 tickets per month, even though their user base increased. The number of tickets per user went from 2.6 to 2.21 over the course of the year, a reduction in 0.39 tickets per user per month. Their annual expense dropped from $4.8 million to about $4.2 million, a savings of $543,000. Their cost per ticket went from $18.66 to $18.44. That's a savings of 22 cents a ticket. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you put it all together, annually at the beginning of the year, they were spending almost $600 per FTE for service and support at level 1. By the end of the year, if you look at the cost per ticket, number of users they're supporting, number of tickets generated per month, they were down to $489 per user per year. That's a savings of $100 per user per year. So take the $94 in savings, multiply it by the number of end users, 8,650 end users per year, and you've got an estimated savings from root cause analysis alone of about $800,000 per year. Now, I'll be the first to admit here that there's some estimation involved in developing this. However, I do believe that this number, the 800,000, is probably accurate to within plus or minus 15, maybe 20%. What if it's off 20%? It might be higher, it might be lower. The point is that there's directional accuracy here, and this organization is creating economic value through their root cause analysis program. And this is not just a one-time capture of economic value. This is something that will accrue to them year after year after year. There's real power here, and there's real power in understanding and being able to communicate and portray the savings that result from these initiatives, including root cause analysis. Let's look at our second case study. This one has to do with returning productivity to end users. We're still talking about our insurance company here. Now, let me explain this chart. It's fairly complex, but I think once I go through the explanation, you'll see what I'm trying to communicate here. We did a survey or a benchmark study. It was approximately 18 months ago of 60 organizations in North America. We looked at both their service desk and their desktop support functions. We looked at customer satisfaction, first contact resolution, and mean time to resolve for both the service desk and for desktop support. Based upon their performance, these 60 organizations were arranged into quartiles. The top performing 15 ended up in quartile 1. The second performing 15 ended up in quartile 2. The third performing ended up in the third quartile, and those that performed the worst, that is the bottom 15 in this group of 60, ended up in the fourth quartile. Now, one of the things we also did, there was a time and motion study that was completed in conjunction with this, with one of MetricNet's benchmarking partners. And here's what the time and motion study told us. For those individuals who work in a top performing service and support organization, they lose about 17 productive hours per year on average. Now, your average knowledge worker has almost 3 devices now between smartphones, tablet computers, desktop computers, laptop computers, desktop computers, printers, and in some cases even servers that they have in their offices. Your average knowledge worker has almost 3 devices now. And when those devices malfunction or do not perform the way they are supposed to, those end users, those knowledge workers, lose productive time. In an effort to quantify how much productive time those individuals are losing, we did this time and motion study where we asked the individuals within these companies for a 1-month period of time. We outfitted certain people within the companies with stopwatches, and they actually kept track of when there was an outage, when there was an IT-related issue, when there was a problem service request or whatnot. We asked them to keep track of how much time, how much productive time they ended up losing. And the unsurprising result, this is kind of what we expected, is that if you work in an organization that is performing in the top quartile in service and support, you're losing an estimated 17 hours of productivity per year. On a monthly basis, it's only about an hour and a half, but over the course of a year, it's about 17 hours. For those that were in the second quartile, these blue diamonds here, and the red line, by the way, is linear regression through this data. For those that work in organizations that have second quartile performing service and support organization, they're losing about 26 productive hours per year due to various IT-related issues, outages, software, hardware break fixes, and the like. If you work in an organization that has a third quartile performing service and support organization, you're losing about 37 productive hours per year. And if you work in an organization that is in the fourth quartile, you're losing, on average, about 47 productive hours per year. That's huge. 47 hours is more than a full week of lost productivity. But look at the difference between a top quartile performing service and support organization and a bottom quartile performing service and support organization. There's about a 30-hour gap there. In other words, if you work in a top quartile performing organization compared to your counterparts who have the misfortune of working in an organization that is a fourth quartile service and support organization, you get an extra 30 hours of productivity per year. That's per person. Multiply that by the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of individuals within a company, and you start to see that service and support creates real value to the organization by returning productivity to end users. Now, if we put this together, this was, by the way, the organization, the insurance company, was a top quartile performer. So we estimated that they were saving about 33 hours per year, versus, 33 hours is the average lost productivity. This shows the median, 26 hours. The average is actually 33 hours of lost productivity per year per company. Since the insurance company was a top quartile performer, we estimated that they were only losing about 17 productive hours per year. So on average, compared to the average service and support organization, this insurance company, we can say that they're probably saving their end users about 16 hours per year. compared to the industry average. Now remember, they had 8,650 end users at the end of the year for the root cause analysis. So we multiply the 16 hours saved by the number of users. They're saving about 138,000 productive hours per year. We know that in a given work year, there's only about 1,700 productive hours, so we can determine what the equivalent headcount savings is. So in this organization of 8,650 users, what service and support was doing by being a top quartile performer, they were saving the equivalent of 81.4 FTEs. Now, if we want to put a dollar value on that, the average employee in the insurance company, including their salary and benefits, was making about $79,300 per year. Multiply that by the FTE savings, and we've got a savings here of an estimated $6.5 million. So this is why we are so adamantly opposed to this viewpoint of service and support as a cost center, this viewpoint of service and support as a necessary evil or as a cost that needs to be minimized. Rather, when you invest appropriately in service and support, in the right headcount, tools, technology, training, and so on, you can create real economic value far in excess of the associated cost of service and support. We showed you for root cause analysis an estimated savings of $800,000 per year. For returning productive hours to end users, this is the real big win, an estimated $6.5 million in savings per end user per year, or for this particular organization if you're a top quartile performer. Now, I mentioned that each of these 60 companies participated in a benchmark. And not surprisingly, one of the other things we found is that those that were in the top quartile, almost all of them benchmark annually. Those that were in the second quartile, slightly less than 50% of them are benchmarking annually. Those in the third quartile, about a fifth, 20%, are benchmarking annually. And for those that were in the fourth quartile, only one, remember there were 15 per quartile, total of 60, only one was benchmarking on an annual basis. There's clearly a cause and effect relationship here. We could also ask the same chicken or egg question about this as we could about the value proposition. Are the top quartile performers top quartile because they benchmark, or do they benchmark because they're top quartile? Once again, it's some of both. The answer, though, is almost irrelevant. The implication is that because the correlation is so strong and there is a cause effect, sometimes benchmarking driving high performance, sometimes high performance driving benchmarking, the implication is clear. Any organization that is serious about being a top quartile performer in service and support ought to be benchmarking periodically. Ideally, our suggestion is that you benchmark at least once per year. That brings us to our second set of polling questions today. And those polling questions, as you can imagine, are about benchmarking. And the polling question that I'm going to put up right now is this: have you benchmarked your support organization within the past year? And once again, while you're doing that, I just want to call out to a few people who have joined us today. Eric Ellerman, thanks very much. It's great to see you on our webcast. Ginny Kennedy, great to have you here. Kenneth Heskett, good to see you here. Lee Van Sickle. And a special thank you to those in Australia, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and other countries located throughout Asia where it's the middle of the night, your time. Thank you so much. I know for some of you it's 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. For some of you, even in Europe, Eastern Europe, it's late at night. I just want to thank you for taking the time to participate in MetricNet's webcast on the economic impact of support. So, have you benchmarked within the past year? Here's the answer to that question. 30% of you have benchmarked within the past year. Another 65% of you have not benchmarked within the past year, and another 4% not applicable, presumably because you're not associated or affiliated with a service and support organization. So this is fairly typical. We usually get about a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of the no's, sometimes about 3-to-1, like 75-25, for example. So this is a fairly typical result that we see when we run this polling question. Now there's a companion polling question which I want to open up here, and the companion polling question is this: do you plan to benchmark your support organization in the future? And you've got 5 choices here: next 90 days, yes within the next 6 months, yes within the next year, no plans to benchmark, or not applicable. So give you an opportunity. For those of you who are thinking about benchmarking and have not yet benchmarked, I want to encourage you to continue to move in that direction. Benchmarking is probably one of the best investments you can make in your service and support organization. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but the result that you get from benchmarking, the benefits, the payoff, if you will, from your investment in benchmarking will more than justify any time, dollar expense, and effort that you put into it. So almost 90% of you have weighed in on this. I'd ask the rest of you, if you can, to weigh in on this poll. Do you plan to benchmark your support organization in the future? Here are the results. 15% of you are planning to benchmark within the next 90 days. Another 20% of you in the next 6 months. Another 25% within the next year. 35% say no. Recall on the former poll, have you benchmarked within the last year? The number was about 30 or 35%. So I'm hoping that those that said no on this survey are roughly the same ones who said that they have benchmarked in the last year. On the last survey, that would be the ideal situation, meaning that everybody else is planning to benchmark within the next year. So once again, I just want to offer some words of encouragement. What we've seen is that benchmarking yields one of the biggest payoffs in service and support. A benchmark can identify both your strengths as well as negative performance gaps, i.e. your weaknesses or your challenges. And a good benchmark is diagnostic in the sense that it doesn't just identify performance gaps, but it also tells you what steps, what actions you need to undertake in order to close those performance gaps. The good news is that the best practices in service and support are pretty well understood and documented now. And this whole process of migrating from wherever you are in service and support to becoming a world-class service and support organization doesn't have to take months and months, let alone years and years. You can get there relatively quickly through an effectively designed and executed benchmark. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now in our discussion of the economic impact of support. And this is the third component of our, let me just make sure I close the poll down. Yeah, it looks like I did. Okay. This is the third component of the case study that we began a few minutes ago, and this part of the case study has to do with minimizing the total cost of ownership for service and support. Now, I talked about shift left. This is really shift down, or if you turn this chart 90 degrees to the right, you can see how we would shift left. If you can take a vendor ticket and push it to field support, you save money. Take a field support ticket and push it to level 3 IT, you save money, and so on and so forth. So there's an expression in this industry which says, get it done at level 1. Now, that's not just a cliche. It's not just a catchphrase. There's real value in this, because if you can take a ticket that desktop support is resolving, last year the average fully loaded cost of a desktop support ticket in North America was $62, whereas last year the fully loaded cost of a ticket at level 1 was $22. There's a huge difference here, and by the way, these are additive. When a ticket starts at level 1, you incur about $22 on average of total cost. When you push it out to desktop support, you incur an additional $62 on top of the $22. If you push it to level 3 IT or N-level support, you incur an additional $85 on average. So you can see that pushing the tickets down or to the left, if I turn this diagram sideways 90 degrees, you can see that pushing it down as far as possible makes the most sense. Well, how do you do that? The key to getting it done at level 1 or maximizing level 1 resolution rates is to have a SPOC, a single point of contact support organization. So you've got your user community out here. You've got your level 1 service desk here. You've got your N levels out here. You got your desktop support, your level 3 support. This could be an expert in applications or the data center or the NOC, for example. You've got field support, which we distinguish from desktop support. Field support, typically you get in a vehicle and you go to the site of the user, whereas desktop support, you get in a golf cart or you walk to the site of the user. And then you've got vendor support. Now, key SPOC principles, single point of contact principles, are that you take an end-to-end view of user support. Secondly, the user has a single point of contact for all IT-related incidents, questions, problems, and work requests. And that level 1, or that SPOC, is the service desk. It's the level 1 support organization. Now, this doesn't mean that they resolve everything, but it does mean that level 1 is responsible for ticket triage, resolution at level 1 if possible, effective handoffs to N level, anything beyond level 1 support, resolution, coordination, and facilitation. Now, ticket closure is optional. It's okay to close tickets out at N level, but level 1 has to make sure that the internal OLAs, operating level agreements, are being complied with. So if there's a 2-hour OLA, for example, on a ticket handed off from level 1 support to desktop support, level 1 has to make sure that that ticket is being worked and ideally closed within 2 hours. So although the ticket can be closed by desktop support field support, so on. It's up to level 1 to make sure that those service levels are monitored and that they become the enforcer, if you will. That is, they contact end level and say, hey, this ticket's aging. We got a half hour left on the service level before we blow through that. What are you doing about resolving this ticket? Now, to make SPOC work, single point of contact, desktop drive-bys, flybys, and snags are strongly discouraged. Now, these colloquialisms like drive-by, flyby, snag, if you work in the industry, you know what this means. If you're a knowledge worker within an organization and you're having trouble, let's just say you're doing something simple like trying to archive old Outlook items, and you see a desktop support person, you grab the person and you say, hey, can you help me do this? That's a drive-by, that's a flyby, that's a snag. Well, ideally, what that desktop support person ought to be saying is, no, you can't do it that way. You got to call level 1. They will log a ticket. They will dispatch me if appropriate, but they will resolve if they can at level 1. Now, if you're in a support organization that is used to having these desktop resources around and the end users are used to grabbing them, they're used to these drive-bys, flybys, and snags, I'll admit to you that the first time you change the model and you go to a SPOC and they start hearing that you got to call level 1 if you want support, they're not going to like it. And you're going to take a temporary hit in customer satisfaction. There's no way around it. But for the greater good of the organization and to minimize the total cost of ownership for service and support, it's the right thing to do. Now, in some unique environments, it does make sense to have these roaming desktop support people that do get grabbed, on a trading floor, for example, in a hospital, for example, in environments where you need support, hands-on support right away, immediately. But those are unique and rare cases. In most cases, the SPOC model should prevail, which means that drive-bys, flybys, and snags are going to be discouraged. Now, there's 2 metrics that I want to introduce to you in this particular case study. The first one you've probably heard of. I've mentioned it a few times already in this discussion, and that is first-level resolution rate. And simply defined, it's the number of tickets resolved at level 1 divided by all tickets that can potentially be resolved at level 1. So this is really a net FLR. Let's say that there are 1,000 tickets a month at level 1, and service and support resolves 600 of those. Your gross FCR will be 600 divided by 1,000, which is 60%. But what if we carve out of the denominator those tickets that can't be resolved at level 1? Let's say it's a hardware break fix or something like that. Those get carved out of the denominator because they can't be resolved at level 1. And let's say there are 200 of those. Okay, your denominator now becomes 800 instead of 1,000 because we've taken out 200 tickets that can't be resolved remotely at level 1. So we've got 600 resolved divided by 800 that can potentially be resolved at level 1. Your FLR would therefore be 75%. The second metric I want to introduce you to, which many of you may not have heard of, it's not a widely tracked metric, but in our opinion, it's one of the most important metrics in service and support. And it's called, it's a mouthful, percent resolved level 1 capable. Sometimes it's referred to as PRLC. Now, it's the percentage of tickets that are resolved by desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1. So let me make up some numbers again here. Let's say that desktop support handles 5,000 tickets in a month. And let's say by reviewing the tickets, auditing them, or because there's a checkbox on the ticket and desktop support checks the box when it could have been resolved at level 1, we find that 1,000 of those tickets could have and should have been resolved at level 1. Okay, that's 1,000 that could have been resolved at level 1 divided by 5,000 total resolved at desktop support. So it's 1,000 over 5,000, it's 20%. And by the way, that number, 20%, is about the average number of percent resolved level 1 capable. Now, some people erroneously assume that if your percent resolved level 1 capable is 20%, your FLR must be 80%, but that's not true because desktop support and level 1 support handle a different volume of tickets. If you have 5,000 tickets handled at desktop support and only 1,000 at level 1, then the ratios are going to be vastly different. So you can't assume that the complement, that is 1 minus percent resolved level 1 capable, is equal to your FLR. The math doesn't work out that way. But this percent resolved level 1 capable is a measure of defects, one measure of defects at desktop support, because every ticket that gets pushed to desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1 represents a defect. It's a defect for level 1 because they never should have pushed it there, and it's a defect for desktop support because they never should have resolved it there. So both parties are at fault. And it's not about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about minimizing the total cost of ownership in service and support. And of necessity, that means minimizing the percent resolved level 1 capable and maximizing your first level resolution rate. So that brings us to our next polling question. That polling question has to do with these two very metrics. and this is our last polling question of the webcast. Does your support organization track FLR, first level resolution rate, and or percent resolved level 1 capable? You've got 5 choices here. You don't track either one. You track first level. You track percent resolved level 1 capable. You track both metrics. So I'll give you a few minutes to weigh in on that one. We're always interested in knowing, particularly around percent resolved level 1 capable, because it's not a widely tracked metric yet, but it is, in our opinion, one of the most important metrics to track in service and support because it impacts directly total cost of ownership in service and support. Okay, we've got about 70% of you weighed in on this one. Please answer the poll if you can, and then I'll close the poll down and I'll show you what the results look like. Okay, we're almost at 95%. So let me go ahead and share those results with you, and here's what the poll says. Now 38% of you, almost 2/5, 40%, are tracking neither first level or percent resolved level capable. Another 43% are tracking just first level resolution rate, 3% tracking only percent resolved level 1 capable. I assume that's a desktop support group that answered that question. And then 11% of you track both metrics. I'm pleased to see that the number is so high on FLR, because if we add up those that are tracking FLR and those tracking both metrics, we're at about 54%, and if we subtract out the NAs, we're probably at almost 60% tracking at least first level resolution rate, and then just a handful of you, it looks like 3% level 1 plus 11% for both metrics. Maybe 15% are tracking percent resolved level 1 capable. That's a pretty good number, 15%. As recently as a year ago, that number was about 4 or 5%. So I think the word is getting out there about the importance of this defect metric, the percent of tickets resolved at desktop support that could have and should have been resolved at level 1. It has strong implications for TCO on user service and support. That, along with first level resolution rate, are proxies for your total cost of ownership in service and support. And ideally, you want to be tracking both of those metrics. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down. We're going to move on in our discussion here. Now, remember, we're in the third piece of our case study here, and what we want to talk about now is 2 important technology investments that were made by the insurance company. This is the insurance company whose value proposition we saw, Midwestern headquarters. We're going through the third part of their case study now. Now, before I discuss what those investments were, you can see what one of them was. It was an investment in remote diagnostic software, but before I discuss in too much detail what they were and why they made those investments, I want to digress just a little bit and make a few comments here about technology investments in service and support in general. Now, if you read any of the trade periodicals, ServiceNow, Service Desk Magazine, any of the publications put out by HDI or anybody else, you know that they're very prominent and very common. It's very common to see advertisements from technology vendors. Some of those are hardware vendors, some of those are software vendors, some of those are consultants, but you would be led to believe that if you invest enough money in technology that you're just going to have a great service and support organization. All you have to do is spend a bunch of money on a knowledge base, a remote diagnostic tool, a trouble ticket tool, and on and on and on, and you're just going to have a great service and support organization. But our research shows that quite the opposite is true. Our research shows that organizations that make relatively rudimentary investments, or invest, I should say, at a low level in relatively rudimentary technology, tend to perform better than those who invest more in technology. And it's not that technology is bad, but it is a symptom of the fact that many in this organization believe that investments in technology will improve service and support. Sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. You may recall the hierarchy, people, process, technology. It's very true. You invest first in your people, i.e. hire the right people, train them effectively. Secondly, build processes in that serve the people, that allow them to deliver high-quality service and support. And then thirdly, implement technologies, purchase and implement technologies that support the processes that support the people. So technology is not the first investment you make. The first investment you make is in people. Second investment you make is in process. And then technology is there to automate things. Technology is there to be a slave to the process, and the process is there to be used by the people that work in the organization to deliver high-quality service and support. So there's a mythology in this industry that, gee, if you just spend enough money on technology, you're going to do a great job on service and support, but there's actually a counter-correlation between investment levels in service and support and the performance on benchmarks. I showed you that quartile chart a little bit earlier. The performance on that quartile chart for service and support organizations. Typically, those organizations that are performing better, if you look at the technology investment per ticket or per year that they make, typically those that are performing at the top of the list are the ones that are making lesser investments. And it's not that technology is unimportant, it's that world-class organizations recognize the importance of people and process first, and they make investments there first, and then they will make investments as needed in technology. Now, what this chart is showing you is the effect of remote diagnostic software. You know who some of these vendors are. I mentioned one of them earlier, Baumgar. And what we're showing here is that for first level resolution rate, when there's no diagnostic software, these fuchsia-colored squares are the distribution of data. The average first level resolution rate is 61.4% when there is no remote diagnostic software. For those organizations that do have a remote diagnostic tool that allows you to dial in or proxy into a user's device, sometimes that means their phone, sometimes it's their tablet computer, their desktop computer, or their laptop computer, or even their printer in some cases. But the average first level resolution rate for those organizations that have adopted a remote diagnostic tool is about 78%. There's a significant difference here, about 16 percentage points of difference. Now, this is real data that suggests that the effective application or implementation of a remote diagnostic tool can improve your first level resolution rate. So there's some evidence there that can be used as a business case for any organization that is thinking about adopting this type of technology. Now, what about knowledge management? Now, another couple of sort of disclaimers here around knowledge management. At MetricNet, we do a survey about every other year, and we ask organizations worldwide, service and support organizations worldwide, if they have a knowledge base or a knowledge management process and system. And every time we do the survey, the results come back kind of the same. It's like 80+%, almost 90%, yes, have a knowledge management system. Now, when we ask them, you know, do you have any knowledge in the knowledge base, only about 25% of them actually have anything useful in the knowledge base, which, in my opinion, the conclusion is that it's cheap to buy this technology. You know, it's relatively inexpensive to purchase a knowledge product, but it is very expensive to maintain it and to populate it. And for those of you who have a well-developed or a mature or are moving that direction in knowledge management, you know what I'm talking about. The tool is relatively inexpensive to purchase and implement. What is costly is the development of the solutions that populate the knowledge management system and the maintenance of that so that you continue to populate it with current solutions and purge the obsolete solutions. That's the cost of a knowledge management system, and that is why there's so many systems out there that have no knowledge in them. Now, this organization, and what this data shows, I should say, is that these numbers down here represent a maturity scale. We have a proprietary index that we use when we're evaluating the maturity of knowledge management systems. One says that they've got some rudimentary knowledge skills, but nothing, you know, it might be as simple like a Lotus Notes system where they jot down the answers to questions and that sort of thing, and they kind of store them in a big flat file. Whereas a 5 says that you have an extremely well-developed, mature knowledge management process and system. And you can see here, once again, the red line is a linear regression. The blue diamonds represent data points. For those organizations that are at level 5 on maturity, you can see that the first level resolution rate is significantly higher than it is for those organizations that are at level 1 on maturity. So the implication is that knowledge management can and does have a positive effect on both first contact resolution and first level resolution. But as with any technology, I view it with a healthy dose of skepticism. Once again, the big cost is not buying the thing and implementing it. It's the cost of maintaining it in the long run. However, this data does show that there are real benefits to be had as you mature, as you move to the right on this continuum in terms of your maturity around knowledge management. Now, this insurance company made investments in both a remote diagnostic tool and a knowledge management tool. And they were able to achieve a first level resolution rate of 93%. In their peer group, that is North American property and casualty insurance companies, service and support achieves on average an 82% first level resolution rate. So they're getting 11 percentage points higher. Part of it is knowledge management, part of it is remote diagnostic tool, but some of it also is training. Nevertheless, they exceed the industry average by 11 percentage points on FLR. Now remember, they're handling 19,100 tickets per month, 12 months per year. So, or excuse me, the 11% represents 19,100 tickets per month. So if we look at 11% of their ticket volume, it's 19,100 tickets per month. Multiply that by 12 months per year. And what it says is that this insurance company, their level 1 support organization, is resolving an additional 25,000 tickets per year versus the industry average. In other words, if they were at only 82% FLR, they would be just at the industry average. But because they're at 93%, they are resolving an extra 25,000 tickets per year at level 1. Now, at an average cost, remember our hierarchy a few pages back, at an average cost of $62 for desktop support, and we're assuming that it would only go to desktop support, not any higher in the organization, we can multiply those 25,000 tickets resolved at level 1 above and beyond the industry average by the $62 if they were to push that ticket to desktop support. Some of them got pushed further, so we're being conservative on our estimate here. 25,000 times $62, that's a savings of $1.6 million per year. Again, there's a way to quantify these things, and although some estimation is required, directionally, all of these things are accurate. What we now want to do is sum it up. We want to look at the savings from root cause analysis, which we estimated at $800,000, the savings from return productivity to end users, which was estimated at $6.5 million, the savings from minimizing total cost of ownership or maximizing first level resolution rate. You add it up and you're looking at $9 million in savings per year. You may recall very early on when we set the stage for this case study discussion that this organization was spending just under $5 million per year for their level 1 service desk. We've just estimated that this support organization is saving about $9 million per year versus an average support organization in the industry. That's an ROI, divide the 8.9 million by 4.8 million, of 185%. And it's not a one-time ROI. This is a yearly ROI, 185% year after year after year. Because of their root cause analysis, the fact that their mean times to resolve are shorter than the industry average and they return productive hours to their end users, and the fact that they maximize or have a much higher level 1 resolution rate than the average in the industry. At this insurance company, it's worth about $9 million per year, and they weren't shy about communicating this and asking for the necessary resources they needed to deliver the best possible levels of support. Those resources include not just dollars, but headcount technology, training, and the like. They're very unapologetic about the fact that they spend the money necessary to deliver world-class service and support because what they're returning to the organization is a positive ROI. Now, there's yet another source of value created by service and support, and the reason this is not part of the case study is because it is virtually impossible to quantify the impact of service and support on unplanned downtime. Nevertheless, it is important to understand how service and support can mitigate the effects of unplanned downtime. First, let's think about what the cost of unplanned downtime is. It can be organized into two categories. First, there are productivity losses. This is from the end users who rely upon systems that might be down. There might be a workaround. They might not be able to dial into the VPN or access an application, for example. But there's lost productivity from employees who are idled or slowed down by an IT outage or disruption. What is typically the bigger loss, though, is the business loss. You might lose sales. Let's say you're an online retailer, an Amazon or somebody like that, which I doubt this would ever happen to, but if you're an online retailer and your website goes down, you're probably going to lose sales. You might also lose customers. If the customers have an alternative, they might go someplace else. There's a possibility of product spoilage and shrinkage. Let me give you an example here. We did some service desk benchmarking for a big food producer in the Midwest a few years back, and I can remember one time I was at the service desk. I was double-jacked listening in on some phone calls, and there was a call that came in from a truck driver who said, I've got an 18-wheeler, one of those giant, transportation trucks, with $1 million of frozen pizza on it, and I can't pull away from the loading dock because I don't have a bill of lading. And if you're familiar with transportation of goods and services, you know that a big truck out there that's moving stuff around can't be on the road unless they have the bill of lading, which talks about what's on board, where they came from, where they're going, and so on and so forth. And if this support person didn't figure out pretty quickly, how to print that bill of lading, that guy would have been sitting there with $1 million of, thawing pizza that he wouldn't have been able to get to Safeway and other stores that he needed to go to. But very quickly, the service support person was able to identify what the source of the problem was. They got the printer working, and within about 10 minutes, that driver was on his way. He had the bill of lading. He was able to drive away. But that happy ending doesn't always happen. Sometimes when there's an outage, when there's a disruption in IT, there is product spoilage and shrinkage. And there's also the incalculable damage to business reputation. Incalculable because it's very difficult to estimate how bad of a hit did JetBlue take to their reputation last year and the year before when they had some very serious IT outages. United Airlines and U.S. Airways as well. We've heard about these big, high-profile disruptions. Google has had them. Microsoft has had them. Verizon has had them. When there are these big outages and consumers can't get through, they can't get access to their accounts, for example, that does real damage to an organization's business reputation. So when there is unplanned downtime, you have the productivity losses of those that rely upon the systems, and then you have potential business losses as well. Now, we have some limited industry data on the cost of unplanned downtime, and what we've done is we've plotted that against the cost of prevention and readiness. So our empirical data shows that the more you spend on outage prevention and readiness, the lower the cost of unplanned downtime will be. Now, that's kind of intuitive. This is true of any preventive function. The more you invest in the prevention, the lower the cost of the ultimate disruption is going to be. And that's what these data points show. We got these data points from a variety of different sources. They didn't come from any single source, but CIO Magazine and some other sources. We were able to put together a pretty good, interesting set of data points here. So on the x-axis, we've got how much money is a company spending to prevent downtime and to prepare for downtime, things like disaster recovery, disaster preparedness, for example. And then what is the actual cost of the unplanned downtime? Now, we can fit a curve to this. It's a non-linear regression. And again, what it says is the more you spend on prevention and readiness, the lower your cost of unplanned downtime will be. Well, some people look at this and go, well, why don't we just keep investing in prevention and readiness, and that way our cost of unplanned downtime will go really, really low. And you would be right, except for the fact that your total cost of downtime has to include the cost of prevention and readiness as well. So if you go out here and you're spending $100 million on prevention and readiness, only to avoid a loss of $50 million on unplanned downtime, that's not a good investment. So there are diminishing returns somewhere in here. We just don't know exactly where they are. But what we can do is change this data up a little bit. Let's leave the x-axis the same, but on the y-axis, what we're going to look at is the cost of unplanned downtime plus the cost of prevention and readiness. And I would submit to you that that is the total cost of downtime. You got the cost of unplanned downtime plus whatever you're spending for prevention and readiness. This is a little bit like an insurance policy. You buy an insurance policy, and then when there is an accident, yes, there is some deductible costs associated with the accident, but you have to add to that the cost of the insurance policy itself. And many of us make a decision that, well, I'm going to do a $1,000 deductible instead of a $100 deductible because I don't expect to be in that many accidents, and I would be willing to pay the higher deductible if and when an accident occurs. In other words, your cost of prevention and readiness is going to be lower. Those that choose the $100 deductible are much further to the right here, so that when there is an accident, it doesn't cost them as much. So there's a judgment call to be made there. But again, what I want to emphasize is that what really matters is not just the cost of unplanned downtime, but how much you spend to prevent and prepare for downtime. And so on the next chart, what I'm going to show you is the same data points. The x-axis stays the same, but the y-axis is now the cost of unplanned downtime plus the cost of prevention and readiness. And here's what the data looks like. It's fascinating. When we put a curve through this, nonlinear regression again, here's what we get. Now, this is quite interesting. For those of you who know calculus or like calculus, you know that you can potentially fit a curve to this. Let's just say it's a second or third degree polynomial. If we do that and we take the first derivative and set the derivative to 0, we can find out what this point of minimum cost is. But it's important to recognize here that there is some minimum. We don't know exactly where it is. I would never trust a curve fit and then take the derivative and find out what level of investment to make in prevention and readiness, because if you end up missing and you're off to the left, the penalty is pretty severe. This is an asymmetrical curve. You get penalized a lot less if you over-prepare and spend a bit of additional money on prevention and readiness than you get if you miss the mark. If you don't spend enough on prevention and readiness and there is downtime, the penalty can be pretty severe. So the implication is this: since we don't know exactly what this minimum cost point is, what you do is you overinvest in prevention and readiness. The disaster preparedness, the disaster recovery drills, the backup sites, the hot sites, and all that kind of stuff. typically in the industry, there is overinvestment in this, and this is the reason why. If it were a symmetrical curve, that is, you get penalized equally for over and under investing, there would be a whole lot less money spent on things like SunGuard and other technologies that provide a backup source, or there would be a whole lot less spent on things like disaster readiness and disaster preparedness drills. But because the curve is asymmetrical, the advice is spend more on the x-axis to avoid a big loss on the y-axis, because if you underinvest and you miss the mark, you end up down here, you're not prepared, you get a big outage, it can cost in a big way. Now, what does all this have to do with the economics of service and support? The answer is this. There are practices and behaviors that service and support can engage in to reduce and mitigate the effects of downtime. Just some examples here. You can participate, you can be an active participant, not only in disaster recovery drills, but in also preparing the disaster recovery plans. You can provide outbound notifications for planned outages. We've all seen these. You log into a system, like a SaaS system, for example, and you see a notification that says we're going to be down from Saturday night at 10 p.m. until Sunday morning at 4 a.m. or something like that. These outbound notifications let users know when there's going to be a planned outage. What about an unplanned outage? Well, you can notify users on an outbound basis. Sometimes you can get an email to them, sometimes not. You might be able to get a text to them. You can send outbound voicemails to them, but getting notification to users when there's an unplanned outage, a network outage, for example, to let them know what's going on. This is particularly common when it comes to natural disasters, letting employees know how they can get into the system, what workarounds might exist, and so on. And then just putting a recorded message on the ACD to inform inbound callers that service support is aware of and working to resolve any major issues. These are simple steps that service and support can take to help mitigate and reduce the effects of unplanned downtime. Now, knowing how to quantify your value proposition is good. We've been through a 3-part case study, and then we've talked a little bit conceptually about the cost of unplanned downtime. But being able to quantify your value proposition by itself is not enough. The second and most important piece of your value proposition is quantification, and we covered that. But there's something else you've got to do, and that is that you need to communicate your value proposition to key stakeholders. Now, for those of you who've been on our webcast before for desktop support and service desk, you've seen some of the material that I'm about to present, but it is as germane to service and support, or to, I should say, the economic impact of support as it was to the day-to-day functioning of a service desk or a desktop support organization. Now, I'll start by saying that most of you have probably heard this expression before, which is expectations not set are expectations not met. It's another way of saying that absent any information to the contrary, end users tend to assume the worst about service and support. And there's a reason for it, which I'll get into momentarily. So we need to be serious about proactively communicating and shaping our message, including our value proposition. Now, I want to introduce you to a chart here that, again, some of you have seen this before if you've been on our webcast in the past. And what the chart shows is the relationship between the value delivered by service and support, the actual value, compared to the perceived value. That is, what do your stakeholders think? What do your end users think? What do others in IT service and support think? And what we have here is a relationship between actual and perceived value, where the only locus of points that makes any sense would be this diagonal line, because this is the line where the actual value and the perceived value is one and the same thing. So if you're delivering high value and the perception is that you're delivering high value, that's fair. The perception and the reality are the same. If you're delivering low value and the perception is that you're delivering low value, that is also fair, because you're not delivering much value and you're perceived as such. The problem is most support organizations are down here in the lower right corner. The reason this is red is because red represents danger, green represents good. And I've never in my career, and I've been doing this for a while, seen a service and support organization where the perception is better than the reality. It just doesn't happen that way. You don't have end users or others going around saying that the service desk is great when it's really not very good at all, or saying that desktop support is fantastic when they're just not doing a very good job. It just doesn't happen, unfortunately. And the reason is this. When end users have a bad experience with service and support, they will tell 10, 12, maybe 15 people. When they have a good experience, they don't tell anybody. Okay? So over time, what you hear in the grapevine, the buzz, if you will, around the office is that, well, service and support is not very good. I just heard that John or Mary or Sally had this horrible experience. She was told that they would, replace her hard drive within 24 hours, and it ended up taking a week or something like that. So the bad news spreads far and wide. The good news doesn't go anywhere. And over time, anecdotally, the average person within an organization starts to think, wow, I may have had good experiences with service and support, but I keep hearing these bad things. And so over time, what happens is that the view of service and support, the perception, is diminished. Now, the reason this is dangerous is because decisions are based on perception, not reality. And if the perception is inaccurate, it means that decisions might be based on inaccurate information. It might be a decision to not fund service and support at the necessary or adequate level. It might be a decision not to provide additional headcount or approve projects related to technology, or it might be a decision to outsource that is not justified, or a decision to insource that doesn't make sense. I'm neither pro nor con on the insourcing versus outsourcing issue, but I do believe that those decisions ought to be based on real information. And so it's important to recognize that there typically is a gap between perception and reality, and it does not work in your favor, ever. And so there are two issues at play here. One is operational effectiveness. That is, how do we get as good as we can? Secondly, how do we manage our brand? How do we keep this gap from opening up between perception and reality? Now, this is not about putting lipstick on the pig. We're not trying to take a poorly performing support organization and make it look good. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is get credit for the level of service that you are able to deliver. That's what I'm calling brand management, closing this gap between perception and reality. That's what we want to talk about briefly here, and a key part of this is being able to effectively communicate your value proposition. Now, we've developed a four-part model that involved the 4 W's: who the key stakeholders are, what are your key messages going to be, when, how often do you communicate them, and how are you going to reach these stakeholders. Now, we put together this diagram. This basically boils down into about 3 or 4 minutes, a presentation which typically goes about 2 hours in length. But in terms of timing, you want to have as frequent a contact as possible with all your stakeholder groups. That includes those in IT, it includes your end users, it includes opinion makers and managers outside of IT and the rest of the organization. So at new employee orientation, there ought to be a module on service and support to let employees know how they can get the service and support that they need. When they log in, to the network, the VPN or the actual network, at session login, a little pop-up that says, here's how you reach service and support, or a little icon in the lower left or right corner. When there are training sessions for IT, there should be a module on how to make effective use of service and support during an incident itself. That is setting expectations, managing expectations during an incident, because you can break every record in the book when resolving a ticket, but if the user was expecting you to resolve more quickly, you're not going to get credit for that. So get the news out early, even if it's bad news, and manage expectations during an incident. And then at scheduled sessions, meaning increasingly what we're finding is that service and support will have sessions just very similar to what we're going through right now, where they'll set up a go-to meeting or a WebEx or something like that to communicate what service and support does within the organization. What are the messages? Well, what services you offer. Your value proposition is a big one. You need to be in your face with this, as I mentioned very early on. If you've got a positive value proposition, let people know. Let them know that you're creating economic value, returning productivity to end users for the enterprise. Frequently asked questions. Success stories. And then what channels are you going to use? Well, login messages are a good way to communicate to end users. Quarterly or monthly newsletters, online reference guides, asset tags, surveys, and then user liaisons are individuals that work in different departments within the company. They might be, for example, in human resources or accounting or finance, and they agree to act as the eyes and the ears for service and support, communicating key information to their constituents, that is the end users, from service and support, and communicating back to service and support what they are hearing from their end users about the quality of service and support. Now, some of the more common communication vehicles, I've mentioned some of them already: newsletters, brown bag sessions, getting people around physically around a table, ordering a pizza and communicating about support, or doing it virtually as I'm doing right now through a WebEx or a go-to meeting. Things like mugs and mousepad leave-behinds that provide information on service and support, how you can access them, how you can reset your own password, and what their hours of operation are. The business unit liaisons I just mentioned. Let the end users know how you're performing on end user surveys. Let them know when they log in how they can reach you. And on webcasts, sort of the same thing as the brown bag sessions, and an FAQ site where you provide important information to end users who want to access service and support. So to summarize on communication, managing this gap between perception and reality is pretty straightforward. It doesn't have to take a lot of time or cost a lot of money, but what we found is that the success of your support organization depends as much on your image as it does on your actual performance. Now, the benefits of effective internal marketing include, number one, you can convey your value proposition. This is a potent and extremely powerful weapon. Sadly, only about 18 to 20% of all service and support organizations actually have written out their value proposition and use it effectively within their organizations. But this is an extremely powerful weapon that you can use to communicate your message, to gain credibility, and to get the resources you need to deliver high-quality support within your organization. Other benefits of effective internal marketing are customer loyalty and positive word-of-mouth referrals, credibility, which allows you to get things done, a positive image for IT overall, and I'm going to show you some data on this momentarily, and, of course, high levels of customer satisfaction. I want to return to a slide that I showed about 5 minutes into today's presentation on the paradox of IT service and support. You may recall that less than 5% of all IT spending is allocated to end-user support, and unfortunately this does lead some to erroneously assume that there isn't much upside in this function, and that's why it's oftentimes viewed as a cost center as opposed to a value center. And what we're trying to do as much as anything else in this webcast is communicate how to create a value-centric organization, how to communicate the economic value that you create and generate for the enterprise. And you do so in a number of ways. We went through a few of them. One is that you are able to return productive time to end users. And this is a huge impact. We saw for the case study on the insurance company, it was an estimated value of $6.5 million per year in return productive time to end users. You have the ability and the power and the leverage to help reduce total cost of ownership and support by pushing tickets to the lowest level of resolution possible. But perhaps one of the biggest ones can't be quantified at all. But if you're a CIO or Chief Technology Officer or any senior manager in IT service and support, this ought to cause you to sit up and take notice. This was a survey that MetricNet completed. More than 1,000 organizations worldwide completed this survey about 2.5 years ago. And we asked end users within these companies how they formed their opinion about corporate IT. It was a multiple choice question, and we gave them a lot of choices. It was more than 25 choices. And we told them to pick their top 3, which is why when you add these numbers together, it's more than 100%. But here was the stunning conclusion. 84% of those we surveyed said that the service desk was a very important factor in their overall satisfaction with corporate IT. The second most common response was desktop support. 47% said desktop support was a very important factor in their overall satisfaction with corporate IT. Now this makes sense if you think about it, because end users don't hang out with anybody else in IT. They don't go to the NOC or the data center. They don't hang out with application maintenance and development people, but they do have periodic and frequent interactions with the service desk and with desktop support. So it only stands to reason that their opinion of IT is largely shaped through these interactions that they have with service and support. So the implication for the CIOs and the CTOs and the senior managers in IT are that you need to be making whatever investments are required in service and support, not just in dollars and headcount and technology, but in your personal time and attention to ensure that customers are having the best possible experience here. Because this drives the entire view, customer satisfaction, of all of IT. And that, by proxy, is their view of you. If you're a CIO or a Chief Technology Officer, and I know we've got a few of them on the webcast here today, this can either be your greatest friend, your greatest source of leverage, or your biggest enemy. If you have a weak support organization, this works against you, because as support goes, so goes all of IT. If support is weak, all of IT will be perceived as weak. If support is strong, all of IT will be viewed as strong. So this really is a proxy and sort of a view of your personal performance as a Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Officer, or a senior manager in IT service and support. There's huge leverage if you know how to use it here, which is to make the investments that are necessary in service and support to ensure that end users always have that positive experience there. So the bottom line is this: IT service and support can and should have a positive return on investment. Developing a value proposition doesn't take a lot of time or energy. It's something that you ought to do. But you need to be able to quantify it. You can follow the framework that we've outlined here, and then make sure you communicate your value proposition to the enterprise. So the whole goal of today's webcast was to help you understand how a value proposition can help you accelerate the path from the reactive stage of service and support to the growth stage, and from the growth stage of service and support to the strategic stage. I hope it's accomplished that. I'm going to summarize a little bit here, and then I'm going to get to some of the questions that have been queued up and typed into the dialog box. But I do have a few closing remarks that I'd like to make before I get to those questions. There are at least 5 things that you can do here in the near term to start accelerating your path towards world-class performance, taking advantage of the insight that you gained on today's webcast and becoming a value-centric strategic stage service and support organization. The first thing I would encourage you to do is take a look around our new website at MetricNet.com. Now, one of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free membership module that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, our white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. I would also suggest that you connect with us on social media, where we put out a steady stream of information that support professionals may find useful. We have 4 LinkedIn groups as well as a LinkedIn company page. We also have 4 Google Plus communities and a Google company page. We're active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a MetricNet YouTube channel. In the copy of the presentation itself, we've provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to register for our upcoming webcast. Next month, we're going to be covering call center best practices. In December, one of our most popular webcasts, the Zen of Support. And then on into January, February, and March of next year, we've got a number of exciting webcasts queued up, and these are always free, and we always invite you to sign up, register, and participate in those webcasts. I'd also encourage you to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, magazine articles on IT service and support benchmarking and industry best practices. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, there are 3 ways that you can complete a desktop support or service desk benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are what we call peer group benchmarks that compare your desktop support group, call center, or service desk to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your desktop support scope, scale, complexity, and geography, or your service desk scope, scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of tickets handled, since desktop support and the service desk are both scale-sensitive functions. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmark report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click on the Shop selection on the upper navigation bar, and you'll see our industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, you can always reach MetricNet in the United States at this phone number, 703-992-7559, on our website at metricnet.com, where you can fill out a form and send it to us, or you can just email us at info@metricnet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let me go ahead and take the questions that we've got in the question dialog box. Okay, I'm just going FIFO, first in, first out. Okay, can I get a copy of the presentation? That's from Ginny. The answer is yes. Just when you exit the webcast, a short survey should pop up from Go to Webinar. Just fill that out and we'll send you a copy of the presentation. Okay, from Jean. How soon after assuming management of an old and underperforming service center should I develop and publish the value proposition? Jean, I would suggest doing it as soon as you take it over. It might not be pretty. It might say that there's a negative ROI in service and support, but that's okay. It's important to have a starting point. It's important to have sort of a baseline, if you will, for your value proposition. You can only get better. If I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like you inherited something that was not performing very well. So the value proposition might be negative. It might not be terribly positive, but it represents a starting point. I mean, this is no different than somebody who might be out of shape and decides to start going to the gym. They want to start with a baseline. You know, what's my weight? What's my blood pressure? And they you know, record some things. What are my measurements, and so on and so forth. And that way, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, you can see how far you have progressed. And the value proposition will help you make that determination on how far you have progressed. Okay. Another question, and by the way, if you have any questions, please type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that you have at this point. Okay. Another question. Does MetricNet provide consulting to address weaknesses revealed in benchmarking? The short answer is yes. We can take that offline if you do have questions about doing a benchmark and what follows a benchmark, because ideally when you conduct a benchmark, it needs to be followed with some managerial action that closes any negative performance gaps that you identify in the benchmark. So clearly an effective benchmark is followed by effective action. And so your point is a good one. Again, this is from Gene, which is that benchmark needs to be followed by some action. And you can, as I said, take this offline. You can send me an email at info@metricnet.com, or you can call me directly at the phone number I showed you on the prior page here. From Danny, asking the same question again, how do I get a copy of the presentation? Danny, just fill out the survey when you exit the webcast, and we'll make sure that you receive that. Michael had the same question. So anybody who wants a copy of the presentation, just fill out the questionnaire when you exit the webcast, and I'll go ahead and send that to you. Okay. Are there any other questions? There were only a few that were queued up. Normally we have quite a few more questions, so I want to give you just a few more seconds to type in any questions that you might have before we conclude our webcast here. Okay, doesn't look like it at this time. So once again, I just want to thank all of you for participating in our webcast here today. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please don't forget to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. That's a prerequisite if you want to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Really appreciate the opportunity to present MetricNet's webcast on the economic impact of support. Thank you.